You wake up at 3 in the morning again, and this time it is not because of insomnia or anxiety. It is something different, something deeper, that pulls you from sleep like a silent voice calling from within the depths of your being. The room around you feels both familiar and strange, as if you are seeing it through new eyes that perceive dimensions of reality your old self could never access. You lie there in the darkness, feeling that familiar sensation that has been growing stronger each day, the unmistakable awareness that you are changing, evolving, becoming something your old self could never have imagined. Your body feels different. Your thoughts move in new patterns, and even the quality of silence around you seems charged with meaning and possibility. But with this transformation comes a weight you were not prepared to carry, a burden that no one warned you about when you first began seeking spiritual truth. The people around you, those who once celebrated your victories and shared your dreams, now look at you with different eyes. There is distance where there used to be closeness, suspicion where there used to be support, and conversations that once flowed naturally now feel forced and artificial. You catch them exchanging glances when they think you are not looking, hear them talking in hushed tones about changes they have noticed but cannot understand. You realize with a clarity that cuts through your heart like a blade that the very growth you sought, the elevation of your consciousness and spirit that you worked so hard to achieve, has marked you as different, as other, as someone who no longer belongs to the world they understand. The reflection you see in their eyes is not of the person you know yourself to be, but of a stranger who makes them uncomfortable, who reminds them of paths not taken and potentials left unexplored. You have become a living question mark in their carefully constructed reality, a disruption to the unspoken agreement that everyone will remain safely contained within the boundaries of conventional thinking and acceptable spiritual exploration. Your presence challenges assumptions they have never examined, threatens securities they have built their entire lives around, and forces them to confront the possibility that there might be more to existence than the material concerns that consume their daily attention. This is the lonely path of transcendence, the price that every soul must pay when it chooses to surpass the limitations that keep most people safely contained within the boundaries of the ordinary world. You have tasted something that others fear to even acknowledge exists, and now you find yourself living in the space between worlds, no longer able to return to the comfortable illusions of your former life, yet not fully accepted into the realm you are striving to reach. This liminal space is both a blessing and a curse, offering you perspectives that few will ever glimpse while simultaneously cutting you off from the simple pleasures of unconscious belonging. The ancient wisdom tradition spoke of this passage with both reverence and warning, understanding that this dangerous crossing separates those who remain content with surface existence from those who dare to dive into the sacred depths of reality itself. Every mystical tradition has its own name for this threshold experience, this dark night of the soul, where the seeker must walk alone through territories that have no maps and face challenges that cannot be shared or explained to those who have not undertaken the same journey. The shamans called it the vision quest. The Christians named it the desert experience. The Buddhists recognized it as the bardo state between death and rebirth. When you begin to see beyond the veil of everyday consciousness, when you start to recognize the hierophanies that surround you constantly, the manifestations of the sacred that break through into ordinary experience like sudden flashes of lightning illuminating a dark landscape, you become a living reminder to others of possibilities they have chosen to ignore or suppress. Your very existence becomes a provocation, an uncomfortable mirror that reflects back to them their own unlived potential and abandoned dreams of transcendence. They see in your transformed presence everything they once hoped to become before fear and social pressure convinced them to settle for less than their soul's true calling. Mircea Eliade understood this fundamental truth about human spiritual development better than perhaps any scholar of his time, having dedicated his life to mapping the sacred geography of human consciousness across cultures and throughout history. Through his extensive study of religious phenomena, from the shamanic practices of Siberian tribes to the mystery schools of ancient Greece, from the sacred rituals of Aboriginal Australians to the mystical traditions of medieval Europe, he discovered that those who undergo genuine spiritual transformation inevitably find themselves in a state of exile from the profane world they once inhabited. This was not a modern phenomenon or a consequence of our secular age, but a universal constant in human experience, as predictable as the cycles of death and rebirth that govern all natural processes. The homo religiosus, the The religious human being who has awakened to the sacred dimension of existence cannot simply return to the mechanical patterns of everyday life as if nothing has changed. They have been fundamentally altered at the cellular level, their nervous system recalibrated to perceive frequencies of reality that remain invisible to ordinary consciousness. The very act of recognizing the sacred, of experiencing what Eliade called hierophany, the breakthrough of the divine into mundane reality, transforms a person so completely that they become incompatible with the purely secular mindset that dominates modern civilization. This incompatibility is not a matter of belief or philosophy, but of direct perception, of having tasted waters from a different well and finding it impossible to pretend that all water tastes the same. The person touched by the sacred lives in a different universe than their unchanged neighbors. Even though they share the same physical space and breathe the same air, they perceive meaning where others see only random events, recognize patterns where others encounter only chaos, and feel the presence of mystery where others experience only emptiness and mechanical causation. Think about the last time you tried to share a profound spiritual insight with someone who had not undergone a similar awakening. Remember the blank stare, the polite but distant nod, the subtle shift in their posture that told you without words that you had crossed an invisible line, that you were speaking a language they could no longer understand, or perhaps never wanted to learn. The silence that followed your words was not empty but filled with a kind of horror, the horror of recognition that you had moved beyond their reach into territories they could not even imagine, let alone explore. You saw in their eyes the moment when they realized that you were no longer the person they thought they knew, that some essential part of you had been replaced by something unfamiliar and potentially threatening. This is not their fault, nor is it yours. It is simply the natural consequence of existing in different dimensions of reality, of operating from fundamentally different assumptions about what life is and what it means to be human. The person who has touched the sacred lives in sacred time, where every moment carries the potential for revelation, where the ordinary world becomes transparent to transcendent meaning, where the smallest events can open doorways into infinite understanding. They move through their days aware that they are participating in a cosmic drama of unimaginable scope and significance, that their choices and actions ripple through dimensions of being that extend far beyond the visible world. But the person who remains locked in profane time experiences existence as a linear progression of empty moments, each one disconnected from any deeper significance, each day a repetition of patterns that lead nowhere beyond themselves. They live in a universe drained of mystery, where effects follow causes in predictable sequences, where meaning must be manufactured through external achievements and acquisitions rather than discovered through inner exploration and contemplation. The gap between these two ways of experiencing reality is so vast that communication becomes almost impossible, like trying to describe color to someone who has been blind from birth or attempting to convey the experience of flight to a creature that has never left the ground. This division creates a profound loneliness that few spiritual seekers are prepared to face, an isolation so complete that it can drive some to abandon their path and return to the comfortable unconsciousness of their former lives. You thought that growing spiritually would bring you closer to others, that developing wisdom and compassion would deepen your connections with the people you love. Instead, you find yourself increasingly isolated, misunderstood, sometimes even feared by those who once knew you best. The relationships that once nourished your soul now feel shallow and artificial, constrained by unspoken agreements to avoid topics that matter most to you, to pretend that the transformation you have undergone is just a phase that will eventually pass. They sense the change in you even when they cannot articulate what has shifted, and their unconscious minds react with the ancient human fear of the unknown, the different, the transformed. You have become what anthropologists call a liminal figure, someone who exists in the threshold space between ordinary and extraordinary states of being, and such figures have always been both revered and feared by traditional societies. The shaman, the mystic, the visionary, the sage, all occupy this dangerous territory between worlds, serving as bridges between the known and unknown, while simultaneously threatening the stability of established order. Your presence now carries an energy that others can feel but cannot understand, a frequency that resonates in their depths and awakens longings they have spent years trying to suppress. You remind them of their own potential for transcendence, their own capacity for direct spiritual experience, their own ability to break free from the invisible chains that keep them trapped in cycles of meaningless activity and unconscious suffering. This reminder is not always welcome because it forces them to confront the choices they have made, the compromises they have accepted, the dreams they have abandoned in favor of security and social acceptance. When you reach a certain level of spiritual development, when you begin to embody wisdom and presence that others can feel, but cannot explain, you automatically trigger their deepest insecurities about their own unlived potential. Your very existence becomes a mirror that reflects back to them everything they have chosen not to explore, every door they have decided not to open, every call to transformation they have ignored or denied. This is not something you do intentionally or maliciously, but rather an inevitable consequence of authentic spiritual growth, like the way a candle flame naturally illuminates whatever darkness surrounds it, without any effort or intention on the part of the flame itself. The mirror you hold up is not cruel or judgmental, but simply accurate, and accuracy can be the most threatening thing of all to someone who has built their identity on illusions and self-deceptions. They see in your transformed presence the person they might have become if they had been willing to pay the price you have paid, to face the fears you have faced, to surrender the securities you have surrendered. This recognition can be so painful that they will unconsciously do whatever is necessary to silence or discredit you, to convince themselves and others that your path is dangerous, delusional, or spiritually immature. This is why the messenger is often killed, why the prophet is rejected in his own land, why those who bring light into dark places so often find themselves attacked, not by enemies, but by the very people they sought to serve and uplift. Your light does not threaten them intentionally, but it illuminates the shadows they have become comfortable hiding in, and the unconscious mind will always choose familiar darkness over unfamiliar illumination. You know what touches me most when I read your messages? It is realizing that we are not alone in this search. If you are listening to me now and feel that emptiness, that sensation that something important is missing in your life, I want you to know that I understand exactly what you are going through. There were moments when I also felt completely disconnected from the sacred, lost in the midst of a routine that seemed to suck all the magic out of existence. That is why I want to ask you a very direct question. What was the last moment you felt there was something greater than yourself present in your life? It could have been contemplating a sunset, listening to music, or simply in an instant of silence. If you feel comfortable, write in the comments, "I miss the sacred in my daily life," and briefly tell when that last moment was. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to read today to feel less alone in this journey. And I promise I will read each comment with the care it deserves. The hunting begins subtly at first, like a change in atmospheric pressure that you feel in your bones before the storm clouds become visible on the horizon. Those around you start to question your motivations with a new edge of suspicion, to analyze your words for hidden meanings and dangerous implications, to interpret your actions through the lens of fear rather than love. They cannot understand why you no longer find satisfaction in the things that used to bring you joy, why you seem to need less of their approval and validation, why you spend time in contemplation and inner work rather than in the endless distractions that keep their own minds occupied and their hearts safely numb. Your growing independence threatens the unspoken agreements that held your old relationships together, the mutual dependencies and shared illusions that created the feeling of connection, while actually preventing real intimacy and authentic communication. You no longer participate in the collective trance of consumerism and materialism with the same enthusiasm, no longer invest your energy in gossip and drama with the same intensity, no longer seek external validation with the same desperate hunger. This change in your behavior patterns disrupts the entire ecosystem of relationships around you, forcing everyone to examine assumptions they had never questioned and face truths they had never wanted to acknowledge. This hunting takes many forms, each one precisely calibrated to penetrate your defenses and undermine your confidence in the path you have chosen. Sometimes it manifests as subtle mockery, as jokes about your interests and practices that carry just enough truth to wound while maintaining the appearance of playful banter. The laughter that follows these jokes has a hollow quality that chills your heart, because you recognize in it the sound of fear disguised as humor, the desperate attempt to diminish something too large and threatening to be faced directly. You learn to smile and nod while feeling the barbs sink deep into your soul, each one carrying the message that you are taking yourself too seriously, that your spiritual pursuits are pretentious and self-indulgent, that you have lost touch with reality in your quest for meaning. Sometimes it appears as concerned questioning, as friends and family members who suddenly become experts on spiritual psychology and feel compelled to warn you about the dangers of going too deep, of losing yourself in ideas and experiences they consider impractical or unhealthy. Their concern feels genuine on the surface, but underneath you can sense the panic, the desperate need to pull you back into the comfortable conformity of ordinary consciousness before you move completely beyond their reach. They speak to you as if you were a child who had wandered too far from home, as if your spiritual exploration were a form of mental illness that could be cured with enough rational argument and social pressure. Sometimes it emerges as direct confrontation, as accusations that you have become arrogant, self-absorbed, or disconnected from reality, accusations that cut particularly deep because they contain just enough partial truth to make you doubt your own perceptions and experiences. The most painful form of hunting comes from those who once walked the path with you, fellow seekers who were your companions in the early stages of awakening, but who chose to stop at a comfortable level rather than continue into the unknown territories that called to you. These former allies often become your harshest critics because your continued growth reminds them of the choice they made to remain safe, to settle for partial awakening rather than risk everything for complete transformation. They may frame their attacks in spiritual language, claiming that you have fallen into ego trap or spiritual materialism, using the very concepts and practices you once shared to justify their rejection of the person you are becoming. But here is what Eliade understood that can help you navigate these treacherous waters with grace and wisdom. The sacred operates according to different laws than the profane world, and those who align themselves with sacred principles will always appear threatening to systems based on profane values. Your job is not to make others comfortable with your transformation, or to slow your growth to match their capacity for understanding. Your job is to remain faithful to the call of the sacred that awakened you in the first place, to continue moving toward the light even when that movement separates you from everything and everyone that once defined your identity and gave your life meaning. This separation is not permanent exile, but rather a necessary passage, a death and rebirth that every authentic spiritual journey requires. Just as the hero in mythological stories must leave the known world to complete their quest, you must be willing to leave behind the comfort and security of ordinary consciousness to claim your inheritance as a fully realized human being. The people who truly love you, who are capable of loving the person you are becoming rather than clinging to the person you used to be, will eventually recognize the authenticity of your transformation and find ways to honor it, even if they cannot fully understand it. Others will fall away, and this loss will grieve you deeply because you will remember the love you shared and the dreams you once held together. But you cannot save anyone else, cannot drag them kicking and screaming into the light, cannot sacrifice your own spiritual evolution to maintain relationships that can only survive if you remain small and unconscious. The sacred demands everything, and those who answer its call must be prepared to lose everything of the profane world in order to gain everything of eternal value. Remember that every great spiritual teacher, every mystic and sage throughout history, walked this same path of separation and return. They all faced the choice between belonging to the crowd and belonging to the truth, between being accepted by the many and being faithful to the one eternal reality that calls to every human soul. Those who chose truth over comfort, authenticity over approval, transformation over stagnation, left us the wisdom traditions that now guide your own journey. They paid the price of being hunted, misunderstood, and rejected so that you could have maps and guideposts for your own passage through the dark night of spiritual becoming. The axis mundi that Eliade wrote about, the cosmic center that connects heaven and earth, exists not only in sacred geography but also in the human soul. When you align yourself with this vertical dimension, when you become a bridge between the mundane and the transcendent, you automatically become a threat to all systems that depend on horizontal thinking, on the assumption that this material realm is all there is and all that matters. Your very presence challenges the foundational beliefs that keep the profane world functioning, and the guardians of that world will mobilize their defenses to neutralize what they perceive as a dangerous influence. But you are not really being hunted by other people. You are being hunted by the collective unconscious, by the accumulated fear and resistance that humanity has built up against its own potential for transcendence. The individuals who attack your growth are merely vehicles for this larger force, instruments through which the species expresses its terror of change and its addiction to familiar forms of suffering. Understanding this can help you respond with compassion rather than defensive anger, can help you see that those who hunt you are themselves trapped in patterns that limit their freedom and diminish their capacity for joy. The secret that most spiritual seekers never discover is that being hunted is actually a sign that you are on the right path, that your transformation is real rather than imaginary, that you have moved beyond superficial changes in belief or behavior and have touched something that actually alters the fundamental structure of your being. If you could grow spiritually without threatening anyone, without disturbing any existing patterns, without generating any resistance or opposition, it would probably mean that your growth was illusory, that you had simply rearranged the furniture of your personality without actually moving to a different house. The cosmos itself seems to test those who seek genuine transformation, presenting them with increasingly difficult challenges that force them to choose again and again between the path of awakening and the path of unconscious comfort. Each time you choose truth over illusion, authenticity over performance, love over fear. You earn the right to face even greater challenges, to be tested at deeper levels, to discover reserves of strength and wisdom you never knew you possessed. The hunting intensifies because your light grows brighter, because your presence becomes more undeniable, because your embodiment of sacred principles becomes too obvious to ignore or dismiss. If you have ever felt the crushing weight of loneliness that comes with walking the spiritual path, if you have ever wondered whether the price of transformation is too high to pay, if you have ever been tempted to return to the comfortable unconsciousness of your former life, please remember that you are not alone and you are not crazy and you are not wrong. You are simply undergoing the same initiation that every authentic spiritual seeker must complete, the same death and rebirth that transforms ordinary human beings into vessels of divine wisdom and compassion. The eternal return that Eliade wrote about is not just a mythological concept, but a living reality that you can access through your willingness to let go of everything temporal and conditional, and embrace everything eternal and absolute. Each time you are hunted and survive, each time you are tested and remain faithful, each time you choose the difficult path of truth over the easy path of deception, you complete another cycle of the eternal return, another revolution of the cosmic wheel that turns human lead into spiritual gold. This process cannot be rushed or avoided or completed through intellectual understanding alone. It requires every fiber of your being, every cell of your body, every corner of your psyche to be slowly and systematically transformed by forces that operate beyond the reach of ordinary consciousness. You cannot control this process or predict its timeline or negotiate its terms. You can only surrender to it completely, trusting that the intelligence that initiated your awakening knows exactly what you need and exactly when you need it. The sacred space that you create through your practices, your contemplation, your commitment to truth and love, becomes a refuge not only for yourself, but for others who are undergoing similar transformations. Even when you feel most isolated and misunderstood, you are actually part of an invisible community of seekers who span all cultures and all centuries, united not by physical proximity or shared beliefs, but by their common willingness to pay the price that authentic spiritual development always demands. Your willingness to be hunted, to be misunderstood, to be rejected by the unconscious world, creates space for others to step into their own transformation without having to feel completely alone. Your courage to continue growing even when growth is painful and inconvenient gives permission to others to break free from the comfortable prisons that keep so many human beings trapped in lives of quiet desperation and unconscious suffering. If you have made it this far, it is because something inside you recognizes that there is a different path, a deeper way to understand your own spiritual journey. I know what it is like to feel lost amid so much noise of the modern world, seeking answers that always seem to slip through your fingers. That is why I created this space, this refuge where we can explore together the ancient wisdom that still pulses alive in our hearts. When you subscribe to this channel, you are not just clicking a button, you are joining a community of people who, like you, feel that life has deeper layers waiting to be discovered. Here, you will find not just knowledge, but genuine embrace for your thirst for meaning. Subscribe now and be part of this journey of rediscovering the sacred in everyday life. Your soul deserves this gift. The price of surpassing everyone is not just about losing friends or facing criticism or enduring the loneliness of the pathfinder. The real price is the death of every false identity, every limiting belief, every comfortable illusion that once gave your life structure and meaning. You must be willing to become nobody in order to become who you really are. Must be willing to know nothing in order to discover what you truly understand. Must be willing to have nothing in order to receive everything that cannot be possessed or controlled or lost. This death is the most terrifying experience that any human being can undergo, because it threatens everything that the ego considers essential to survival. The ego would rather be hunted and attacked than completely dissolved, would rather fight for its existence than surrender to the transformational forces that want to birth something infinitely more beautiful and authentic through its willing sacrifice. The hunting you experience from others is often just a reflection of the internal hunting, the war between the parts of yourself that want to remain small and safe, and the parts of yourself that long to expand beyond all known boundaries. But on the other side of this death awaits a resurrection so complete and magnificent that it justifies every moment of suffering, every loss, every dark night of the soul that preceded it. When you finally stop trying to protect and defend and preserve your limited sense of self, when you finally allow the sacred to completely remake you according to its own mysterious purposes, you discover that you have not lost anything real, but have only shed the illusions that prevented you from recognizing your true nature. The person who emerges from this process of death and rebirth is both utterly new and eternally ancient, both completely individual and universally connected, both fully human and divinely inspired. This person cannot be hunted because they have nothing left to lose, cannot be threatened because they have already surrendered everything, cannot be defeated because they have discovered the invincible essence that exists at the core of every conscious being. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who might be walking this path alone and questioning whether they have the strength to continue. The wisdom of Eliade and all the great spiritual teachers belongs to everyone, and by sharing what illuminates your own journey, you help light the way for others who are struggling to find their direction in the darkness of this transformational time. Your story matters, your insights have value, and your willingness to be vulnerable about your struggles and victories creates bridges of understanding that can save others from unnecessary despair and confusion.